Hello, welcome back to the No Name Cinema Society. We are as much as 7 minutes late, if you can believe that, because we just got so excited talking about Hands of Stone. Probably not excited in the way that you're thinking, but we just talked about Hands of Stone, and we ran a little late, and now we're a little late starting about doing this movie, our indie spotlight for the night, which is a film called The Interrupters. Hi, I'm Jonathan Betzler. I'm one of your several hosts this evening, and our indie spotlights throughout 2016 have been looking about indies from 5 years ago. Sorry, I got a text. Indies from 5 years ago, which is 2011. So we started with Shame, and I've been recommending indies in preferential order, downward preferential order ever since. But all films that I like, only my recommendations. And tonight is a documentary. I think the only documentary I'm going to recommend from 2011, and it's called The Interrupters. And that is our Indie Spotlight for the evening, and here are my co-hosts for the Indie Spotlight. Who am I starting with? Let's go with Jay Money. How are you, Jay?
I'm good. I feel like you were definitely excited by the end of the conversation we were having about Hands of Stone.
Well, if you want to find out what that means, ladies and gentlemen, you can tune into Hands of Stone. And these guys judge me for being a guy, is all I want to say. Davey Joe is my other co-host. How you doing, Drunk Davey?
Doing well.
How's that seltzer water?
I finished it.
Man.
And by seltzer water, I mean vodka. He's actually got vodka in there. So cheers to you, Davey. Cheers to you, J Money.
Cheers.
Let's have what we hope will be an abbreviated look at The Interrupters. Here's our full schedule for the evening, so you get a sense of everything that we're covering, each separate show. We just talked about Hands of Stone. And then now we're talking about The Interrupters, albeit a few minutes late. Coming up at 9 o'clock, approximately, 6 o'clock Pacific, is a little movie we like to call The King and I, but just us. I don't know what anybody else calls it. And then our sound off is our freeform segment. Everybody asks me about that. What's the sound off? It's where we basically just say anything we want. I'm going to do my top 5 Rodgers and Hammerstein films. Davey's going to have one of his trademark diatribes, and the other. What's that?
The other
segment is a second run film in which we talk about a film that one of us hadn't brought up, and the other one's like, oh, I haven't seen that. And then we have to watch it. Although I'm the only one that's actually done any of the watching. That's beside the point. Guys, you know what it's time for?
What's that?
It's time for Tidbits. So we gave some trivia related to this film on Facebook and on the last episode. On the last episode, you may recall the last Indie Spotlight, which was a separation. I had said something to the effect of, this was the film that Chi-Raq wanted to be, an effective and moving portrait of gang violence in Chicago and the possible solutions. That's what I thought Chi-Raq wanted to be, if anybody of you have seen Chi-Raq. Facebook trivia question was, this is from the filmmaker who is the only documentarian ever to receive a Best Editing Oscar nomination. That's Steve James, who was nominated in 1994 for Hoop Dreams, a very famous documentary and the only one ever to get a Best Editing nomination. And now this is one of his other films, is not his most recent at this point, but this is a film called The Interrupters about Chicago inner city life. So those are my tidbits. How do you guys feel about that?
I feel impressed by your tidbits.
I could take that in so many ways. In other words, that is what she said. So I can't see you right now, Jim. I hope you're smirking or something. No,
I'm shaking my head. We're going to have to figure out which direction.
Davey Joe, come on. Let loose.
Okay.
Classic Davey Joe.
I'm telling you, every time before the show, Davey Joe is like the crassest, whatever, and then we turn on the cameras, and he's all like, give me scoldy face every time I go a little out of line. So anyway, it's time for the summary. So The Interrupters, it's a film funded by PBS. It documents a year inside the Chicago organization known as Ceasefire. It's a group committed to ending the exorbitant amount of gun violence in the Windy City. And their preferred method is violence mediation, performed by individuals they refer to as interrupters. And I think that it has also been, like, I watched this movie for our August 29th broadcast, so it's been a good month and a half so that I worked on this and prepared for it. So I'm a little rusty, I think, but it is our movie for discussion for tonight. Let's see what the first thing is. I'm going to explain why I recommended it. Well, I mean, personally, I find it extremely emotionally engaging, which, as many of you know, is kind of like the litmus test for me. Like the first step is if I can get emotionally engaged in the characters, even though these are real people, and maybe that's what makes it even more emotionally engaging, then that helps a lot. I will also say that I think it's inspiring. And even watching it the second time, I actually cried several times. I think these people are true heroes, and in particular, this woman right here, Amina, I found very inspiring. And I think it's a fair documentary, which is one of the things that I feel very strongly in terms of documentaries, in the sense of showing both sides of an issue, like something. Otherwise, it becomes propaganda, and we could talk about propaganda artists like Michael Moore and people like him because he says things that people agree with, but the people that like him are the people that agree with him. But it's not necessarily how I believe a documentary should be made. Same goes for the documentarians on the right side, Dinesh D'Souza, etc. Don't like their work either. So those are the things that I liked about it. I think it's time for, I had some minor cons I just want to throw out there before you guys' opening thoughts. I was frustrated that I thought it was maybe possibly staged in places, and I thought some characters, and this is an editing thing, were established a little late in the game, like that. I think this should have been established earlier. We should have met earlier, and we can talk about that. But small things and an otherwise very satisfactory experience for me. Who does opening thoughts first? It is J Money.
I agree with everything you said, basically. It's sort of like, I think that it was a good, solid movie in general. I don't feel like anything really stood out to me about it. I don't feel like there was anything really exceptional about it, but I do think it was a very competent and a very solid telling of a lot of the problems that, Chicago is facing. With gang violence and also just other parts of America, really. But so I guess
I don't want to exclude Davey, but and so there wasn't anything like particularly like innovative about it. Is that what you're getting at, or is there a documentary that you do feel like is more?
I don't know. A lot of ways, I don't know if watching this now, 4 years later, when the topic of violence in Chicago is still a real hot button issue, and also has become even more so, I guess, in some ways over the last year, being involved in the election process. That watching it made me feel cynical in a lot of ways, and that probably affected my opinion about it. But I just didn't feel, I guess to your point, I didn't feel like there was anything really innovative about it. And I guess I felt like I kind of knew the story in a lot of ways ahead of time, and I felt like there were a lot of familiar patterns to how they introduced characters and saw their like little arcs kind of play out. So, and that's not really defaulted because, this is all real life, and I think that they were pretty fair and accurate in terms of, just portraying life as opposed to having a real strong, narrative or, opinion about it. But at the end of the day, it was, I thought, a very standard documentary.
Right, but I don't think there's anything wrong with standard documentaries if it's done well. But what would be a non-standard documentary to you? Like that?
Yeah, I don't know. I really have to. I should think about
the other documentary that we talked about on the show was 20,000 Days on Earth, which did have some innovations to it, but.
Yeah, and I also feel like that's barely a documentary. It's the kind of thing where there's a lot more that they put into that than actual, just talking about.
No, for sure. But as I mentioned in my cons, this was sort of stage 2, but I had some stagey moments. But before we get to that, Davey Joe needs his opening thoughts. Go ahead, Davey.
Well, just that non-standard documentary, I think Listen to Me, Marlon would be a good example of a non-standard documentary.
Sure, which made my top 10.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's a little different in the sense that it was about the past as opposed to about the present.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Definitely. The thing about this movie, it grabbed me right off the bat because the scene in the beginning with the fight, I was scarier than that we did a horror movie as an indie that
which we don't.
Girl walked home alone at night or whatever, which had not one scare. Nothing comes close. That was just, my heart was racing in that scene. I was terrified, and it just, it really sets the stage. It's just a great way to show the stakes, and it just set the table for what I thought was a great documentary.
All right, so there is some, and we're on a roll with these documentaries with Davy Joe. I mean, like, he's been, like, licking them up like fucking, like chocolate. Wow. Sorry, I got excited. But, I mean, every 2011 documentary, I think we've watched them all. You've liked them all.
Yeah, I enjoy documentaries. I do.
No, I mean, every 2011 indie, I mean.
Indie. Like, oh, yeah. Yeah, I think I've liked all of them this year. Or for 2011.
So, I mean, like, and they're all my recommendations, so it makes me feel good. It makes me feel good. Let's talk about the structure a little bit, because I think that's the key thing from, when you're looking at a documentary, that's the key artistic choices that you're making is how you put together this story and introduce the characters and things like that. Like it could be, and this is what it's almost even though Hands of Stone is not a documentary, it might as well have been. And this is what Hands of Stone failed to do in sort of like this could have been a very sprawling story, but they focused. Like they chose certain people, certain areas to focus on. Amin is one. There's other characters, Kobe, Eddie, Mikey, and I forget this girl's name. Did anybody watch this recently? The very angry girl.
Oh yeah, her name is geez, it's funny because I remember thinking it was such a weird name at the time. Not weird, but like it stuck out to me.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna remember. Go on.
Okay, so anyway, that's what I think about. I mean, that's So basically, I'm saying like I think one of the strengths is the structure, and how they introduce these characters. Now, J Money, you're saying this is sort of standard. I think it's harder than it looks. I think, but
yeah, I couldn't do this. I mean, I guess let me backtrack a little bit because it's not like I don't want to sound like I don't want to sound too critical because I certainly think it's a good movie. I don't think it's a bad movie in any stretch of the way. I just to me, it didn't necessarily stand out as something that I felt like was exceptional, but I think that was a very solid documentary.
Do you guys get what I mean about? I wish that some characters had been introduced a little earlier.
Well,
I felt like Eddie in particular came in late in the process, and it's one if I were screenwriting it. I would feel like that's awfully late to be introduced to someone new. Like I feel like we're in the flow of these other characters and their story, and then Eddie comes in, and his story is interesting. Everything about it is interesting, and the artwork that he does, fascinating. But it did feel late. Anybody else with me on this, or am I just being nitpicky?
No, it did feel late because I guess in a lot of ways I thought that they were setting up a pattern where they were going to keep doing that, and they didn't. I think that he really is the last major character that they introduced. And, I don't know why they decided to do that, other than that he also kind of had his own separate storyline that really felt, to me, very divorced from the rest of the movie. And maybe they just, decided they needed to kind of...
Well, it was just different. I just wish I'd met them all in the beginning, and then we came back to them. Like, I wouldn't have mind cross-cutting between them if we had met them all sooner. Davy Joe.
I don't know. I mean, it's a little asymmetrical, which sometimes I can appreciate that. He just, it's like, hey, here's another guy. It didn't bother me. It didn't bother me.
Here's another guy. That's what he says when we pop onto the show every week. Oh, here's another one. Here they are again, with that kind of same passion. But he loves us. He loves us dearly. Do you guys get what I meant about? Did anybody else feel like sometimes that scenes felt a little contrived, and not a bad way? Like they worked, but I mean, like it feels like anti the documentary ethos, if you will, ethos.
Which one stuck out to you being contrived? I mean,
Well, I mean, like, I think, well, I have to be honest, it's been a long time, and I did not make specific notes, but I mean, like, one of my favorite scenes, which we'll get to later, but also, which I don't want to give that away, but certainly, when gathering at a
funeral,
a funeral, or what am I thinking of? Or getting, when there was a hospital visit involved, and and that felt a little like, all right, stand a little, you know what I mean? Like it felt, it's tough when I mean, like reality shows do this all the time, so it's not new. But I mean, like, it does feel, Oh, getting the brothers together, you know, for that meeting. If you remember the brothers that were fighting with each other in separate rival gangs.
But that's mediation. I mean, that's what you do.
I mean, yes and no. I mean, like the way it was done, orchestrated for the film, though. You know.
I do know what you're saying. I don't think that they tried to pass anything off as spontaneous. I mean, I think that's what
Fair
would
enough.
really get under my skin. I think that they were pretty above board about, you know, this is a meeting, this is, you know, that kind of thing. This is a sort of a press conference or something. You know what I mean? I don't think that they.
I mean, stuff all felt fine. It was when like the people run into characters. Like it's like. Sometimes it felt like they just happened to be in the right place, and other times it felt like they were pulling strings here and there. And it's, again, I like the movie. I'm just being
Sure.
We're unpacking a little bit.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm on a. I understand what you're saying, and I mean, but you didn't get the sinking feeling. Like, I don't want to like over accentuate that it bothered me constantly. I like the movie a lot, so it didn't, and it was effective mostly. And I'll give an example of that in a moment. But I think that it was it was in the back of my mind, you know, just like they're kind of cheating a little bit. It's working, but it's kind of cheating. But I guess maybe from an insider perspective, I'd be the only one to notice that. I don't know. J Money, you seem pretty attuned to that sort of thing.
Well, I guess from my point of view, is you know, a lot of the scenes felt contrived, but I didn't think they were contrived for the movie. It felt like to me they were contrived for the mission of what they were doing. In the sense that I felt like there was, I don't want to say that they had their own sort of internal script that they would run through, and I don't know what it's like when they go to events in general and mediate them, but a lot of that stuff felt to me contrived because it felt like they were kind of running through whatever they have already set up and agreed to you know, how they were going to run mediation.
Yeah.
So I like the funeral stuff, for instance, and some of the spontaneous, I guess, speeches that Amina gave, like on the street, for instance. They felt contrived to me. I don't think that they were necessarily. I just think that all these.
And maybe that's what I'm reacting to. How do you guys? I mean, like, I have 3 more questions I want to ask in so little time. Real quick, how do you guys feel about the seasonal breakdown? Is there value to that, the way they broke it up into seasons?
Yeah, you know, that's a really good question. It didn't go in the direction I thought it was going to. So I don't really know if that really mattered in the. I don't think it mattered to me personally by the end of it. It was an interesting way to organize chunks of time.
Yeah, I don't really have an answer for it either. Like, I was curious about it, but I didn't necessarily see what the value was. Davy Joe, do you have anything?
I think I think that it's maybe practical. I mean, it would be odd to be flipping back and forth from sun to snow and such. So.
I mean, maybe. I think that we could have done without the intertitles and still like figured out time was passing. You know.
Yeah.
My other question, my second of 3 is, I mean, and this is going to potentially be a big one because I watched it with my cinematographer, JW, who I think you guys may have met in the past because he was here. He just left the other day. He was here visiting, here for 2 months. And he was very frustrated with the film, almost like he sounded like you in a little bit because he came from a very cynical place and he was frustrated with the film because he said, clearly this isn't working. You know, we're watching it from a 5 years later on prism. So he's like, clearly this isn't the issue. So I don't want to like get too political, but at the same time, how do you feel about the ceasefire program? What does this documentary make you feel about the ceasefire program? Do you feel like it's not working? Do you feel like it's a bad solution? And if so, what's a better solution?
Well, you know, it's interesting because the thing that kept popping up for me was while I was watching this is, you know, they were very adamant about trying to describe the situation as a war zone, and that's actually kind of that's terminology that's actually kind of fallen out of favor. You know, 4 years now, 5 years out now, where people are really talking about using that terminology to make it seem a little too. It's been kind of picked up for the wrong reasons by certain like racial biased crowds. So it feels to me like in some ways it's almost like there's a part of this that's like out of sync with how we think about all these conflicts in certain urban areas at this point. But I mean, you know, to his point, it's 5 years later. Things are only worse. They're not better. And you know, is there a solution? Did it have an effect at all? It probably had an effect on a personal level, but clearly they're not going to actually fix it. But I don't think there really is anything we can do to fix it. So, you know,
there's nothing we can do. I mean, like certainly there's gun laws that we can do. Isn't there?
Yeah, but I mean, even banning guns outright at this point, and by the way, I support tighter gun legislation. I don't want to get the wrong impression here, but even banning them outright, it's not going to fix gun violence in urban centers. I mean, it's just they're already there. The part of the problem is that people just want to fight. While I was watching this, it struck me that the issue is really more on line with talking about how we deal with terrorism. It's an ideological war much more than it's anything else. We're trying to convince people to sort of not feel like they have to stand up to the suppression that they feel that they're up against constantly.
I mean, what I think that ceasefire is, because it's like a movie that we're going to talk about in the sound off. So maybe I'll bring it back to them. But it starts from the education level, and I think it's something that's going to take years to really manifest itself. Like, I think it could work, but it's like a 40, 50-year plan potentially to turn that around.
Yeah,
as scary as that sounds.
People will stop fighting when they feel like they don't want to fight anymore. And
it's like you're saying, it's a learned behavior. So if you change that behavior from the young age, then there's hope. I also I wanted to talk about a great charity here, a great organization here in Los Angeles called Homeboy Industries, and maybe the sound off will have time for that, which is doing something similar by actually he created there's a Jesuit priest here who created a cookie business so he could hire all the gang kids in the neighborhood in like South Central, and basically he just gave them jobs to keep out of the gangs, and it works. So anyway, that's Davy Joe. Do you have anything on the political end of it?
Well, yeah, I just think that I didn't get any sense of the scope, the scale of this program. I mean, I saw with 4 or 5 guys, and then they said that there's limited funding. So I mean, I think you can only really gauge the effectiveness on a micro level, and to the sense that to the extent that they seem like they prevented crimes. Like, we saw some things that could have escalated, could have gotten a lot worse. I don't know that, who's to say that things wouldn't be even worse without this? I mean, I think you can only kind of measure it on a case by case level and the people that they interact with. So it looks like it looks good to me. That's the only
we saw them
thing
in battle, we saw them in battles, but it's the thing is they turn off the camera at some point. We really don't know what happened in the 5 years of a lot of the main characters.
But I mean, like, if like to Davy's point, if they save one, that's something. You know what I mean? Like, that almost makes the whole program worthwhile to me.
Yeah, except that we only saw them save one at one instance. I mean, we were, I don't know.
I think there was a couple success stories, but we can get into that. And I'm sorry to rush you guys along, but it's 1 minute to 6 over here. So, real quick though, I want to get this in. I think it's only fair. Do you guys have a favorite scene from this movie? Davey?
Yeah, I mean, I thought at the end when Flamo is at work and I was really happy. I mean, it was great to see that.
Yeah, Flamo's a great character. I have several pictures of him that I'm not going to get a chance to use, but Flamo was a great entry to this whole process and one of the success stories. One of a few. But go ahead, Jay Money. Do you have a favorite?
The scene where Amina and Capricia are on the bench fighting.
You went up and looked at it. You looked it up.
I looked it up. And the reason I thought it was funny is because her name sounds like Capricious, which I was like, that's a really interesting name to give your kid. But yeah, that scene to me felt in some ways the most raw and the most realistic, because I do feel like both emotions were really. I did
have a photo of that scene earlier. I think it was one of the first ones I showed, or second photos I showed from this movie. This is my favorite scene, and this is, and you don't see him in here. You see him in the mirror there. This is the little Mikey apology.
Yeah.
Which to me was like one of the most heartbreaking scenes. I mean, like, and I understand it's manipulative and contrived. Like, I get that. And this is what I was sort of pointing to. Like, I knew that it was sort of like rigged to some degree, but it worked.
But it happened. I mean, they did.
No, absolutely, absolutely, it happened. And the balls that the kid to do that. The story is he had robbed this store, this barber shop, and he got put in jail, and he came back and he apologized, and there were tears, and they hugged him, and it was raw and just like, it just gave you hope. Like, for all the darkness, I felt hope in the end, and that to me is the mark of a great documentary. So. That's why I wanted to get it out. And another success story, J Money. So it's not just one in this movie; it's 2 or 3 if you count the brothers. Like, I don't know, like Capricia, but Capricia falls off. She's not one of the success stories. So you win some, you lose some. But I think the effort is really noble. But anyway, so you guys okay if we move on because we're really late now?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's move on.
All right, so guys, it's going to be like 6:15, 9:15 Eastern, 6:15 Pacific before we get to the classic at this point. So look for our discussion of The King and I coming up very shortly. I've got to tease the next indie too, which is a cult favorite with an alliterative title. So you already know it's 2011, so use those clues, see if you can figure it out, and more trivia will be posted on Facebook soon because it's 9 days. Coming up right now, about 13 minutes, I guess, 6:15 is the classic movie of the evening. We're going to talk about The King and I, which the group and I went to see at the TCM Festival here in Los Angeles in April. You'll see it shortly.